Hello and welcome to this session on proving how your voluntary and community organisation makes a difference post-COVID, part 1. Here we'll be looking at the definitions of outputs, outcomes and impact. My name's Karen, I'm the Impact Officer for Impact in Action, which is a project run underneath BVSC, Bexley Voluntary Services Council. BVSC does a whole range of different things. Do get in touch if you'd like to know more. We run a social prescribing project called Community Connect, my project Impact in Action. The Volunteer Centre run lots of different things, including a group called Launchpad to help people into volunteering who would like a bit of extra support. And we also do partnership work, including networks and forums. So plus lots more. So do get in touch if any of those are of interest. My work is kindly funded by the City of London Corporation's charity City Bridge Trust. And the work includes a raft of different support that you can access up until July 2022. The time will come around quickly, so make the most of one-to-one questions that you might have. We can go through those. I do various training, my 7 sessions, of which this is number 1. Plus, we also buy-in training from other groups, and you can get some recorded training from me as well. There's lots of resources on the website, both one-page wonders that I've written, but also there is a version of this course that is done as a booklet as well, and various other things, including useful linked pages. Plus, when I wrote this slide, the big thing that we were thinking about was Way Up, which is a quality assurance scheme. So just a tiny bit about me, just so that you know that I've got a bit of experience in the sector, and that I've had experience of what it's like to try and implement this on the ground, because I've generally worked for small to medium-sized charities, and I've worked in, amongst others, Bromley, Bexley and Newham. So this session will cover a number of things. Why is an impact approach useful and important? How it fits into your organisation, and a number of definitions. I would say don't panic. There's quite a lot to take in. You can pause and take notes. You can, for me it took a couple of probably training sessions, because if you're not using it, you sort of forget this stuff. But it took a couple of sessions of training to really bed this in. So this training starts at the bottom of the triangle here with understanding the terminology. The second session covers how that terminology fits together. Then if you want to apply this to your organisation, you may want to have go to our website and find those resources that I talked about, or get some of the one-to-one support that I also talked about. Then you'll be free to review and self-learn. So broadly speaking, impact is a broad or longer term change. At this point, I normally ask people, why would you want to measure a broad or longer term change that your organisation brings about? Why measure impact? And you might want to pause here and jot down a few reasons why you think that's important. Okay, so the reasons that we talk about and discuss are the importance of having a positive, broad or long-term change. Now, these charities got in trouble with the news and more because they're supposed to be having a positive change, but the Oxfam safeguarding allegations and the kids company issues do not sit well with what what organisations should be doing. So we need to build trust, and we need to be showing and sharing and doing things that bring about positive change, long-term change. So measuring and sharing impact helps us to build trust. Why measure impact? Another reason. So at this point, I ask groups, who out of these two is the real superheroine? Okay, hopefully you chose the green lady. She is changing people's lives, whereas the first person is simply measuring what their outputs. We'll come to that in a second. But she's simply measuring what the organisation has done and not the change that has happened as a result. So if we want to measure what matters most, we want to measure the things why your group was set up in the first place, then we need to be measuring impact. And that is part of why your group was set up. It should be in your founding documents as to the benefits that your group will bring about. Why measure impact? It's part of this learning cycle. So a learning cycle can be drawn in different ways. We'll come to a different way in a second, but this is the basic version. You plan your work, you do your work, then you assess what has been good, what has not been so good, and you review and improve it. And it goes back to planning new work, doing new work, and so on. And what I normally say here is that although this is cyclical, it can be seen as a spiral, because each time you're moving upwards and you're improving things, hopefully. So it's really responsive to changes, which is why right now with COVID, it's a really good idea to have a learning attitude. This is taken from a really good website, which I've noted there. I've got their permission to use this. And I would recommend checking out Inspiring Impact if you want to know more. Overall, then, why measure impact? To learn and improve. And as I said, here's another example of a learning cycle. There can be different versions. And this comes from In Focus's course. And they do a free sample course, introductory one. So may be worth you having a little look at that if your stuff is really sparking a desire to know more in-depth stuff. So why measure impact? Imagine you're a funder and you've got lots of voices coming at you. We do good stuff, we do nice things, and so on. How are you going to stand out from the crowd? And one way is to show the funder that their funding will make a difference. And if you're not measuring how you're making a difference and sharing how you're making a difference, how are they to know? So again, we've got our orange and green ladies here, amongst the others, but the green lady stands out. 70% of the people we helped in 2019 said our service was life-changing. So a big reason for measuring impact is because funders want and need to know that their money is going to something that's going to change. Why measure impact? Well, you can see here that, and I wrote this originally right at the very beginning well, not quite at the beginning, but I wrote this in July when people were still thinking that COVID would blow over. And I'm now speaking in March 21, and COVID has not blown over yet. And there'll be lots of changes coming out of any lockdown stuff as well. So we need to, I suggest, be nimble and spot the gaps and fill them. And to do that, an impact approach is helpful because because it looks at how to plan the work, how to do the work, how to change the work in response to how the world is changing. So right now, I would suggest that measuring and having an impact approach is more important than ever. So here's a summary of all the different reasons why it's worth measuring impact. And the reason I've bothered to, not just dive into, what impact is and how we can do this, is because this is in all the organisations I've worked for, it's been a journey to move towards measuring impact, or even measuring outcomes, and it's not always straightforward. And to have this in mind, to have in mind that this is worthwhile, that there are good reasons to do this, can really be helpful. So yeah, ultimately we want the best for our beneficiaries, and that ultimately is why we have this impact approach. So I said before that impact is a broad or longer term change, just to introduce the general gist of the idea. But in community development circles, funder circles, this has a more specific definition. Okay, so before we talked about impact being that broad or longer term change, and this bigger definition includes more elements. So I want you to imagine a youth group and an impact of a 3-year project to create a radio station could be decreased offending rates for young people in Bexley over 3 years. So you can see that it covers the whole of the Bexley Borough, so it's a broad change, and it's for 3 years. It's longer term change, and having decreased young offending rates in the borough is likely to mean that there are direct and indirect beneficiaries. So the direct beneficiaries are the young people who are no longer reoffending, but the indirect beneficiaries are the potential victims of crime will no longer be victims of crime. The families will be more stable because they won't have young people who are reoffending. So you've got the direct beneficiaries, people who are benefiting directly, and the indirect ones. Also, it's not just your doing. So you've created your lovely radio station, and that has been a focus for the young people, but probably there's some other influences there as well. Maybe a really good pupil referral unit has helped the young person, or their school has helped them, or there's been a project that helped the parents to know how to communicate well with their young person about the issues that they've got. So it's likely that there'll be other groups that have helped to make that bigger, longer lasting change. So that's what impact is. These definitions are taken from inspiringimpact.org, which is a nice coalition of groups. So these are definitions found based on what a number of different groups are all saying. And you've got here your impact right at the bottom, and you can see longer term effects of a project or organisation's work that people achieve for themselves. This can include effects on people who are direct users of a project or organisation's work, effects on those who are not direct users, or effects on a wider field such as government policy. So impact is the kind of big and long-term thing. But stepping back from that, there are steps on the way to that happening. And one of those is an output. So an output is what you're doing. Your projects, services or facilities that result from an organisation's project or activities. For example, workshops, leaflets, casework sessions or brokerage service. And that's what that green superhero lady was doing before. She was handing out lots of leaflets, wasn't she? That was an output. An outcome is where you actually change your beneficiaries. So Outcomes: the changes, benefits, learning, or other effects that result from what the project or organisation makes, offers, or provides. So if you're trying to work out, you've got a sentence, you're trying to work out whether it's an output or an outcome or an impact. An outcome and impact both tend to have words of change. Outcomes especially have words of change. Now, those of you who are thinking ahead are thinking to yourself, well, it's lovely, isn't it, trying to measure impact. An output is so much easier to measure, isn't it? Because we know how many workshops or leaflets we've done. It's more in your control. You can control how many leaflets you hand out. How can you control whether somebody becomes more confident or resilient? You know, it's much harder because they've got to be part of that, haven't they? So as you move towards down the line to outcomes and impact, it's less in your control and it's harder to measure. But as we said before, there are lots of really good reasons why we do persist in measuring this. And those were all in the lovely stars earlier, weren't they? You know, because this is really the bit that matters as to whether we see change in our society. Sometimes it can get a bit confusing when we've got different elements that we're trying to put together. And so it's helpful to know what impact is not. And these are some other definitions that you'll come across. And it all compares to making a cake. Okay, so an input, if you were making a cake, is the ingredients, utensils, recipe, and so on. If you compare it to a project, that's the input of putting in all the money for staff, putting in the resources, the time, and so on. Your activities, this is the bit that's quite straightforward and how we normally revert to talking about if we get a bit panicky. So activities is what you do, measuring things, mixing, icing, slicing a cake. Whereas in a project that would be delivering counselling sessions. We then start to measure those activities. So that's an output. There's a cake for 10 people. Or in a project term, 10 people receive counselling. But then what we really need to try and move into is to be able to talk about our outcomes. Because we didn't make a cake for no reason. We made it because it was somebody's birthday so that 10 people felt more happy or full. And the outcome in a project might be 10 people are more confident, happy, or healthy. Those are just examples. So matching up with our radio station example from earlier, which of these rectangles goes against which of these definitions? And you can pause the video here to decide for yourself. So here are the answers as I suggest them. Inputs. In order to even do the work, you have to have certain inputs and you have to have those laptops for remote working. The activity is planning the radio station. The output is that a radio station is created, and the outcome, the very reason you did the radio station, is that you've got increased team working skills. So in terms of remembering the main definitions, here's something that's just a brain hook for me. An output is where you put something into somebody's hand. What have you put upon them? Or you may have put something into their hand, you may have put a workshop on them. You're putting something onto the person. But an outcome is what has become of that person. What's the change? And an impact is what other important groups were part of that change. There are some other definitions below as well. Moving on to indicators. An indicator tells you whether something is happening or not. Is it happening a little or a lot? Think of a litmus paper. Is something acid or is it alkaline? Is it a bit acid or a bit alkaline? How much is it? It's got those different colours, hasn't it? And you can have output indicators. So we said earlier that an output is that a radio show is created, and an indicator for that is that 10 radio shows are created. So you pop a number on it, and then you can tell, did we achieve that or not? Did we get very far in achieving that or not at all? And then you need to think about how you're going to measure it. So you'll keep a log of the radio stations. You know, we did 9 in 2020 and 10 in 2021. Similarly, you can have an outcome indicator for increased team working skills. So as we said in that diagram with the arrows to the left, it can be harder to measure this. So we might have different indicators to measure this to try and get a picture of whether we have achieved increased team working skills, because trying to get that is a little bit more slippery, isn't it? So here I've suggested that 70% of participants surveyed noted an improvement in teamwork. So you survey the people to ask them whether they think they've got increased team working skills. You may have case studies, little stories about how one person in particular, or how as a group they started in this place, we did the intervention, this happened. And I've got some material on case studies if you're interested in knowing how to write a case study. And then 10 people gained internal teamwork certificate for observed teamwork. So your staff and volunteers are observing and they're saying, oh, look, this person has improved. We'll give them a certificate. So how to measure it? At this point, I would ask the group, how would they measure these things? And you can pause the video here if you want to. However, I would be saying that for the 70% of participants surveyed, you would measure it with a survey, of course. For the case studies, you would do case studies. And for the 10 people gaining internal teamwork certificate, you would keep a log of those who had gained the certificate. Now, in the COVID context, funders are currently being very understanding, but we don't know quite how things will land. So we want to position ourselves well. It's really a good idea to have your outputs and outcomes ready, because as they're bringing around new application forms and new schemes for streams for funding. These are probably questions that they're going to ask. And if you're wondering what to do during COVID, there are various different websites, including this one here. But also, yeah, do contact me if you'd like some one-to-one support. If you're changing your activities or going for funding, then I can help. Now, next time, imagine what a wonderful world it would be if all of your activities and outcomes could be put on one page that summarised the changes your group is making. Well, we'll see what happens next time. So this is a short game section. And in this game, you need to do the correct action. So if you think it's an output, you put a leaflet in someone's hand and you do the action of putting a leaflet in someone's hand. If you think it's an outcome, you move your hand outwards to show what becomes of the person. If it's an impact, you look to the distance to see what has become of that person, shading your eyes, yeah? And then if it's an indicator, do an action as if you're measuring someone for a dress fitting. So what is the action for increased awareness of support available to victims of fly tipping? And you can pause the video if you need some time. So I suggested that this is an outcome because we've got words of change there, and it's just in relation to your group that there's an increased awareness of support available to victims of fly tipping. Action for 3 sessions of summer holiday activities. And again, you can pause the video if you need to. I suggest that this one is an indicator because it's got a number, as if you're measuring something, and it's in relation, I would say, is an output indicator because you're measuring the number of things that you have done, that you have put on other people. So you have done 3 sessions of summer holiday activities. What is the action for reduced obesity in the Bexley Borough over 2020 to 2025? I suggest that this is an impact because it's looking to the distance, isn't it? It's over a broad area and over a broad time period. It's likely that you're not the only group that's going to be involved in helping to reduce obesity. Hopefully, the gyms will be helping, messages from local clinical commissioning groups will be helping with that as well. So well done. I hope you did well on those. And this is number 1 of 7 sessions. I'll be hopefully running them in various different ways. We have a booklet that goes with this if you need that. And there's, depending on when you listen to this, there'll be various different training coming up. I'm speaking in March 2021, and at the moment we'll be having superhighways training that happens at the end of March. If you'd like to run a workshop with your group to go through this, to share these ideas more widely in your group, then give me a shout. I'm happy to help in that way, or we can just discuss lots of different ways that suit your organisation. Thank you very much for your time. And if you need me, that's my email address. And do check out the stuff that's on the Impact in Action part of the website. Loads of useful information there. And finally, we are able to provide this completely free of charge, but obviously somebody pays for it, and we want to get back to our funder and tell them how this has changed your group, hopefully for the better. So for that reason, for our marketing in general, we'd be really appreciative if you could fill out this training evaluation form. Thank you very much again for your time.